But the satellite measures radiation going in and going out very accurately, and the satellites are telling us that they've overestimated the importance of these greenhouse gases, what's called sensitivity, rather significantly, because the satellite's seeing virtually as much coming out from the atmosphere and Earth combined as is going in. So
is that true across the board, like all over the world?
These are averaged over the Earth, and so the result is that they believe the sensitivity of the atmosphere to these greenhouse gases is much less than is modeled. The models also fail because they know that carbon dioxide is a trace gas. Only 0.038% of our atmosphere is CO2, and man only accounts for 3% of that.
Sorry, I want to stop you for a minute. Give us that first number again.
0.038% of our atmosphere by volume is carbon dioxide.
What does that mean to us, 0.038% of our atmosphere is carbon dioxide? One half?
It means
1/4?
a very minor component. The atmosphere is primarily nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and water vapor are next in importance. Carbon dioxide is way down the list as a component of the atmosphere. It's not a lot. And if the models only included the carbon dioxide warming, even with their exaggerated sensitivity, the warming they'd show over the next century would not be alarming. It would be half a degree or so. They couldn't obviously get countries to inflict pain on their people with that kind of a warming, because if people thought that we've got to stop this 1 degree warming, people would say, well, why? It's hardly noticeable. But so they built into these models a lot of what we call positive feedbacks. They say, well, when you warm the atmosphere, you increase the water vapor and you change the cloud picture. And these work together to trap even more heat and amplify the warming. You get a lot of high clouds, which reflects the Earth's heat that's trying to escape, and the result is a much amplified warming. That's how you get your models that predict 11 to 13, 14 degree warming, over the next century. But these models are failing. In the first decade of the century, we've seen a cooling. So even one of the key lead authors of the IPCC report and a major player in this climate community, Kevin Trenberth, who works for the National Center for Atmospheric Research and NOAA, said it's a travesty that we can't explain the lack of heating.
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but after you look at every single aspect of this, it just turns into a theme, an agenda theme, and it's very hard to digest because you have falsities at every level of this, every single level. Most of the public has digested this all as climate facts. Climate realities. We have to control the climate. We have to fix the climate. And then this is all kind of thrown in like a soup. The climate change is now a condition and a problem. It's not a cycle.
Right.
We are terrible as humans to, quote, kill the planet. I love the planet. I love animals. I love plants. I love nature, just like you and everybody else. Most people love the earth.
I've been an environmentalist all my life, as have you. I'm a conservationist. You should see what I do to try to maintain minimal energy usage around my home with insulated siding and insulated garage doors and front doors. And we're very careful about the energy that we use. We burn wood in the winter to supplement. We recycle everything. We're as much in favor of being good stewards of our environment as anyone associated with any of the environmental groups. But that doesn't mean we're not going to look objectively at the data and report back what we find.
I've just heard that there's a bill in Congress to now tell us that we cannot use certain light bulbs, that we can only use a certain kind of light bulbs, and even the light bulbs we're now going to be instructed and forced to use are toxic. They're totally toxic. It's right. Unbelievable. The incandescent bulb is going to be outlawed. We'll need to use a compact fluorescent bulb that they thought was such a wonderful idea. It's terrible for you. Terrible.
Mercury, and if you happen to drop it on the floor, they tell you to get your children out of the house. In some places, they actually require you to call in a hazmat group to come clean it up at great expense to you. And when these lights eventually burn out, people will be throwing them into the trash, and they'll be going into our waste dumps, and we'll be polluting our waste dumps with mercury.
This is truly an agenda in the works. It's obvious it's an agenda. Next thing you know, the EPA will be regulating oxygen. Seriously. If they can do it with carbon, they can do it with oxygen.
Well, they did it with sulfur dioxide, and Enron made a lot of money from that. And that gave Enron the idea that, boy, if we could do the same with carbon, just think of all the money we could make. And they went to Al Gore and Bill Clinton and told them that we need to figure out how to control carbon and carbon dioxide. And Clinton thought they were nuts, but Gore believed it, and the rest is history. The primary driver for pushing this carbon tax is carbon trading, and the big corporations, a lot of which are involved heavily with the administration.
Probably Goldman Sachs. We know J.P. Morgan.
Yes, GE.
Also involved in light bulbs?
Yes, exactly, and windmills and solar. And they own a lot of...
radio and television?
Right. They own a lot of the original rights for carbon trading that Enron held. They all see an opportunity to make a lot of money. Also, the Chicago Carbon Trading Exchange, who, by the way, was the lawyer that helped to get that established, was Barack Obama.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is that verifiable?
Valerie Jarrett, one of his advisors, is on that board.
Who is that?
Valerie Jarrett.
God, this is really a connected matrix, isn't it?
It really is, and that's why they continue to push for this carbon, even though the public is not believing it anymore.
Don't you think a lot of people still are duped about global warming and are scared to death? I can't tell you how many people I see on Facebook and Twitter and the social networks that are saying we're killing our planet. I resent being told I'm killing the planet. That is just a falsity to declare that and to continue to repeat that over and over into consciousness.
And every time you challenge them and try to explain otherwise, they right away accuse you of being bought and paid for. You must be a shill for big oil. You're obviously in it for the money. And we say, no, we're not. We're trying to spread the truth so that we don't make a mistake, because you start imposing these carbon restrictions on it. Yes, it may initially be only the biggest utilities, but even then, cost of energy goes up. Remember, the president himself said the cost of gasoline is going to skyrocket. Gas is going to skyrocket, and it will. They've estimated increases in the cost of energy of 70% or greater, and that affects everybody. That's a tax that affects the poor and middle probably more than it does higher income individuals. And it's not a real tax on you directly. It's an indirect tax because your cost of energy goes up. But when the cost of energy goes up, and never mind the fact that eventually the regulations will spread to smaller and smaller emitters, so that eventually even churches and supermarkets will be paying taxes and will have to be filling out paperwork and have controls imposed on how they operate and what energy they use and so forth. But as you increase the cost of energy, there's a domino effect.
Absolutely. Cascading.
It's not a value-added tax, but in actual fact, it almost is, because it costs more for factories to produce what they produce, more to get the goods to the factories and from the factories to wholesale and retail stores, because transportation costs are higher. It costs more for these stores to operate because the cost to warm and cool the stores goes up. And if they have an extra tax on them imposed because they're big enough Walmart to emit enough CO2 to cross that threshold.
Who's imposing the taxes?
No one is imposing the taxes. Well, the EPA would regulate the levels at which CO2 must be kept, and there'll be penalties, which are basically taxes imposed that will go to the government.
That's terrible. Terrible.
It comes from our pockets, and even though they will say, we never increased your income tax, yes, but the cost of living, I've seen estimates from anywhere from a couple of thousand to as much as $6,000 per family per year more from, we used to call it cap and tax rather than cap and trade. Well, they got smart and they found out that the public didn't understand what cap and trade meant, and we were using cap and tax. It made it look like a tax, and so they call it something, the American Power Act or Clean Energy Act. Or
it's terrible how they've hijacked the environmental movement. terrible.
Right.
It's a disgrace. When I think about they're going to force us to use toxic light bulbs,
Right.
that they pour terribly toxic vile materials into the Gulf. The EPA let that happen. And then they turn around and they call carbon a toxin. This is a fraudulent organization. I can't even believe we allow them to exist.
You know, as much as I'm all for alternative energy, and I think there's some promise in solar and locally in wind power is a major issue, and it helped create the problems that they have in Europe because they all bought into the green agenda and pushed for solar and wind power.
I can see the attraction, can't you?
Sure.
At the conceptual level.
Spain looked at it after a number of years of implementing this high degree of subsidization of solar and wind, and they found that Dr. Calzada, Juan Marcos University, did a study, found that for every green job that was created in the process of this renewable energy push, they lost 2.2 real jobs because the cost of energy skyrocketed and the big corporations said, we can't afford to do business here anymore, so they built plants in India or China or someplace else in the world, and workers were left out on the street. And for every 10 green jobs that were created building windmills, only one was permanent. Because once you build the windmills, you don't need the contractors to stand around anymore. They have to wait for the next opportunity. And they found that the unemployment rose to 18.7 or 9% in Spain, and now they're backing off of that. A similar experience in Denmark, a similar experience in Germany, Italy. I spoke to at a conference a scientist who did a similar study and found the same results in Italy. But worse than all of that is the environmental movement has been totally silent, especially the World Wildlife Fund and the groups that deal with animals, on what windmills do to bird life and bats. Greenpeace had sued ExxonMobil for 6 birds that were found in an oil tank that had drowned and got $600,000 in fines imposed. Well, it's been estimated anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million birds a year will be killed by windmills in this country, including, and they're finding it in the UK as well, including the high-value birds, the golden eagles, the bats, which are very valuable and eating insects, are being killed by the hundreds of thousands as well.
There's another side to the wind, though, Joe, that I think you know, but you may not be talking about, which is I was always very excited about wind power. I had just believed everything I had heard about it. And then I did an interview some months ago about wind power and found out that a lot of the big energy and lighting companies are involved in this, and it actually ends up costing more money and taxes the grid more to use wind. And so there's a whole economical side of it that's never really been analyzed on a detailed level.
You're exactly right. They found the same thing in Denmark and Spain, Italy, that they could not close a single fossil fuel plant where they put up windmills because the wind was too erratic and unpredictable. And you can't have your lights dim or go out. You have to maintain a constant energy. So they had to keep fossil fuel plants in a ready backup mode or in production and integrate wind into the grid. The CO2 emissions from these coal and oil power plants in their less efficient modes actually resulted in an increase in the CO2 by 36% in one country and 50%, I believe, in Denmark. So it didn't solve the problem of CO2. It killed birds and bats, but it underdelivered on the amount of energy it provided and cost jobs and didn't save any fossil fuel. So as much as I was an early endorser of wind and solar as a supplement, always thought of it as a supplement, not as a primary source, but I have cooled a lot on wind power as a reliable source. Perhaps in the middle of the desert, along with solar panels, it makes sense, but not anywhere near people. There are also health hazards. They've found wind turbines make a humming noise that causes people to have headaches, migraines, to not be able to sleep.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I didn't know that at all.
So that's another downside to the wind. But
I'm for Tesla, the work that Tesla did. I'm for advanced energy systems and methods. And I'm a big believer that energy
really was created to be free, and that this shouldn't even be used in a form of accounting. It's absurd. We live at a time where we should be living as human beings in a very advanced, highly matured, evolved way.